Hey guys, I'm going to talk a little bit about the Industrial Revolution again today. We're going to do a couple of sections, and I'm not going to spend a whole heck of a lot of time on this because a lot of this is stuff that we've already talked about. So let's get started here. We're going to talk about why life changed as industries grew. We're going to talk about how increases in agricultural production allowed the growth of industry. I probably should have said allowed instead of led to the growth of industry. And we're going to talk about some new technologies that kicked off the Industrial Revolution. You got these already. So I'm going to start by talking about the fact that the Industrial Revolution began in Britain and then spread. And we've already gone over this when we were talking about the cotton gin today, that the whole concept of the Industrial Revolution is allowing machines to do work that up until this point hands had done. The Industrial Revolution, it's hard to put a date on it, but I'm going to use 1750 to 1850 just because it's easy math. But you can see here on the screen the basic changes that happened during the Industrial Revolution. It changed where people worked, it changed how they worked, and it changed how they got stuff as well. We've talked about this already, the fact that most people before the 1700s grew whatever they ate, and after the mid-1850s, the majority of people in Europe bought the things that they ate, and it was grown by somebody else. The farms is where all this happened, and we talked a little bit about that already as well. In order to have a workforce that lives and works in a city doing things besides growing crops, you had to have an increase in production and farming, and this is where it started. The Dutch, they built dikes, which is dams, I'm sure you know that, to control water and to allow fields to grow crops that normally would be underwater at times. And they also began to experiment with fertilizer as well. The British took that and ran with it. The British were limited as far as the amount of land area they have because they're on an island. They experimented with crop rotation. And I think Chase mentioned this in class today, that we talked about cotton a little bit. Cotton is bad for the soil, but changing crops from year to year allows the soil to not get depleted as much, and that's called crop rotation. And then this dude named Jethro Tull invented a seed drill that planted seeds in rows. Number one, it buried the seed, it kept birds from getting them. Number two, it put them in rows, which allowed better handling while they were growing as far as getting weeds out and that kind of stuff. And it also allowed you to use less seed than just scattering it and hoping for the best. Enclosure is a term that basically means farms grew in size. At one point, farms were pretty small, but as the process of enclosure happened, peasant farmers, the land that they controlled or the land that they farmed was taken in, annexed would be a good word, by larger farms. So farms got larger and larger. That put many farm workers off of their land, so they went into cities to work. And the fact that cities were growing, cities needed people to work in factories, and people had been put off their farms, these things dovetailed together to provide a workforce for the growing manufacturing sectors in cities in Europe. Here's just a graphic that shows the population change from 1700 to 1800 in Britain and in Europe as a whole. In the early 1700s, this guy, Abraham Darby, found a new way to smelt iron, which is just the first process in taking iron, melting it down, and making steel using coal instead of charcoal. And coal burned hotter, which allowed, and we talked a little bit about this, allowed him to create a higher quality steel, which higher quality steel is important if you are going to create a 400, 500,000 pound steam engine that basically has a boiler, which technically is a bomb that you are trying to keep from exploding. this guy, Darby's son and grandson, continued to work on the process, which allowed steel bridges and railroad tracks, which all this is tied together. And that's the thing that I want you to see is that, whenever we talk about a process, I want you to think, what caused that, or what did that cause? This dude named Thomas Newcomen, who you've never heard of, created or invented the steam engine, but James Watt made it more efficient. And that became the power source that ran factories, steam engines. We talked a little bit today about the water wheel, which powered grist mills and things around this area of the world. But once the steam engine came into being, number one, it was more powerful. Number two, it didn't have to be near a running river. All it required was a source of water to produce steam. And there were new technologies as well, anesthetics, which is nice if you're being operated on. The telegraph was huge because it allowed long-distance communication instantaneously, whereby you could send a message and immediately it gets there, as opposed to having to rely on a messenger to deliver it. The sewing machine allowed the cotton that was produced, that was turned into yarn and then string, to be put together. As far as once cloth was created, it allowed that to be sewn together faster. And antiseptics was pretty impressive, or pretty important to this time period as well, because of the fact that it saved so many lives. Europe had just come through the plague, several plagues, and it was still not understood how disease was spread, but there was a group of people who were beginning to grasp that. All right. We're going to talk a little bit about the transportation revolution and why Britain was so important to the Industrial Revolution. Here again, you can read. I'm not going to go through all of these. A number of things that allowed Britain to be the center of the Industrial Revolution. And you can understand why all these would be important. Ports, rivers that are navigable, water for canals, access to the sea, which as an island they would have. And here's the thing that John Green talked a lot about, is access to coal and large quantities of iron. And this is just a list of some of their resources and where they're located. Britain also had a lot of inventors, which is helpful if you are creating new technology. They needed one more thing, and that was money. And there were a lot of people who were looking to invest money in order to increase their wealth at this time in Britain. Britain also had a couple of more advantages. They did have a stable government. They had no tolls on rivers that a lot of other European countries had, and they had a powerful navy that allowed them to protect their shipping interests. We talked a little bit about the putting out system, which basically cottage industry, people sewing in their own houses. The demand for cotton went up, and that whenever there's a demand for something, people try to figure out how to meet that demand and make more money. The flying shuttle sped up weaving, and the spinning jenny spun several threads at once. And then there was a device called a water frame, which was used to power the entire process. We've already talked a little bit about Eli Whitney, the cotton gin, and how it produced a very high demand for cotton products. There were need to create new roads, and so the concept of a turnpike is a road that private industry created and then charged people to use. There were canals that were opened, and canals would allow barges to be used, and barges could use could carry a lot of weight that wagons could not. And then the Liverpool to Manchester was the first railroad line, I believe, that was built in England. It was opened in 1830. And this whole process set off a cycle that I've described earlier, which was things were cheaper, people bought more of them. The fact that they were cheaper made more people want them, more people be able to afford them, and then this cycle just continued for quite a while during the Industrial Revolution. And as John Green would say, it has pretty much continued until today. And we will talk about that a little bit in class on Wednesday. Is the Industrial Revolution still going, or was there an end? See you Wednesday.